Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello. How's it going? Oh, oh, did my sound get messed up?
I still
Okay,
hear you.
okay. I couldn't hear you for a second. I switched to the monitor there for a second. Okay.
I think it was me doing something weird too because my
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
my AirPods were not working for a minute, so I think that was me.
Gotcha, gotcha. How's everything coming along with our portfolio, our little projects? Everything going good so far with with what we worked on? No, we haven't went over too much so far, but today would also, this one's going to be a fairly quick class. So if you have any questions about your portfolio in general, just any questions about anything like the homework material or anything like that as well, this would also be a good time to go over it because we should have a little bit of extra time. But if you don't have any questions at this moment, we'll just go ahead and get uh right into it. All right. And then we're able to see the screen just fine. Okay, perfect. Okay. So today, I know we've talked about, I will pretty much every class so far talk about the difference between the server and the client component. Uh, what we're gonna talk about, if you remember on Saturday, I mentioned that, you're gonna see a lot less use effects with Next because you can do a lot of the fetching on the, server side. So use effect goes from, being one of those components where you can use it to fetch data, to being a component that is there for essentially user interfaces. So like things that the user is going to interact with within your web page. Although there still might be cases where like you have to fetch some data and render that specific component based on the newly fetched data, right? But that's very situational because you can still have the server component interact with the client component, right? So um even then it's still very uncommon that you'll see that. And that's also an issue you'll see with React in general is the overuse of use effects, because a lot of people depend on them a little bit too much. So you'll see like a lot of people will use them a little bit too much. And even when I was first starting out, I kind of relied on them a little bit too much. I put anything in a use effect, right? So that's one of the things you want to be conscious of. Like you want to be more aware of like when to use a use effect, all that stuff. Um, but today we're just gonna cover we're going to touch a little bit more on the server and client components, and then show you an example of fetching data in a server component and an async server component and passing server data down to a client component. Uh, so just like to recap, the server component, which is for Next, is going to be the default. It runs on the server and the back end, so the client doesn't see it. And then whatever it renders, it sends it to the client, to the browser in HTML. So like we're used to the client component, it runs in the browser. And then that use client tag that we put at the very top of the code that I mentioned when we first spoke about it. And then like I mentioned, the server is going to be for like, data and any content that can be rendered or generated statically, right? So if you want any hard coded content, you would use the the server component to generate that. And then like the client, you want to use the client for interactivity. So anything that the user is going to interact with, that needs to change dynamically based on user input, like forms, and different things like that. So you want to make sure you default to server. Uh, a lot of the time you will see some instances where you might see a bunch of use clients throughout an application, throughout a project. Whenever you see something, whenever you're gonna need to do a use client, you want to evaluate if that's something that you really need to do, right? If there's a um more efficient way to do it like if there's a way to do it on the server side. But if anything that's going to involve interactivity, obviously that's going to be the default. And then is using a client is going to be default. But then but if there's anything that could be handled by the server, then you also want to consider that, in which we're in good. So like I said, it's gonna have, oh my goodness, hold up. I did not realize it was a duplicate. I was running the slides on the wrong screen. Oops, I am so sorry. I didn't even realize it. Okay, I don't know why. For whatever reason, it was on my other computer and my brain it just slipped me. Okay, but you didn't miss anything. It was just these talking points that I went over. But now this is what we're getting into next. So client components. So that use client. This is for instance, this is gonna be like the file, right? You want that use client to be at the very top of your typically, okay, so typically it'll be at the very top of your file. You can use it like right before, like if you were gonna declare a function, you can use it right before a function. It gets a little messy like that. But you tip generally want to keep them small, right? The component itself. So that way you're limiting what is being handled on the client side, right? So you like with Next, you want to keep as much as you can on the server, because that's where it does all its magic for the most part on the server, right? And those server components, all that good stuff. So you want to keep it on the server where you can. So if you have like for instance like a form, then you're gonna want to use that the use client on that form that uh that handles like interacting that the user is going to be interacting with, and then that way anything that's happening on that form is using the client, and any static HTML that's been generated is been handled by the server already. You do have to use it, so use client is required for use state, use effect, and then event handlers, right? So that's why I keep saying forms, because generally when we're handling forms, we are monitoring the data that's being input to those forms by event handlers and the such. And then what's the word? Yeah, event handler. So we're monitoring the values, uh, updating values, all that stuff. We're using the event handlers to interact with those. So by default, we have to use clients for those type of things. So that's why I mention forms a lot.
I have
Any
a question.
questions? Oh, there it goes. Perfect.
I'm sorry. I completely
No,
jumped the gun.
no,
Um,
exactly. Feel free to jump in whenever, anytime you have a question.
okay, my question is, I was wondering like if the use client thing, does that mean, with these event handlers and stuff, does this mean that like when the phrase use client is there, does that mean that the client, it's like saying that the client has to do something to make these things happen, or does that have anything to do with it?
Um, so sorta. So what is use client is, so it's the string. So we know, yeah, it's this little string right here. So we know that Next.js is doing a lot of things for it, right? It's looking at the file structure. So what it's doing is it knows it's looking at the component, it's going in there and say, okay, this is this file, and then the first thing it's gonna see is, or it's gonna see this string and it's gonna say use client. So it's gonna register that, okay, just like you said, yeah, we're gonna be using the client. So that's the directive to tell it to use the client, right? So from there, Next.js knows that it's a client component, so it is going to use the client. So uh it's going to direct it to use the browser resources, right? Or wherever it's being rendered, those resources instead of the resources on the server.
Okay, so does that mean like the person looking at your site or whatever it is
Mhm.
that they have to do something to trigger something? Is that what that means?
So it doesn't like impose a requirement for them to do anything, right? Because like what the server component doing is just generating all that HTML on the server side, right? So it's saying like if we okay, so what's happening, let's say if we have a component and in that component it uses two other components, right? On the server side, it's just generating all that HTML. It basically compiles that HTML and then it outputs that HTML. So instead of it outputting, it's not going to be outputting that component with the two components in it, right? It's going to give the HTML version of those components and then it's going to send it to the browser. So it just sends it like basically one long HTML file instead of, a component with two components in it, right? It's just it basically makes them into one HTML file, sends it to the browser, and then the browser just generates it as it got it from the server. So that's how it does that. What the client component does is like what it's telling it to do is instead of that HTML being generated on the client side, it's now reading that file. I mean it's essentially already going to be um yeah, so it's reading that and then it's generating that HTML based on like, the JavaScript, right? It's using JavaScript to change the HTML. That's where we're getting those. Basically, the use client, you get access to the JavaScript, right? From the browser, right? You get access to the JavaScript from the browser. So it is allowing you to interact with, so now you got your HTML that's able to interact with the JavaScript is a basic way of saying it. So that's what the use client does. So it's not necessarily saying like something has to happen, but the way it is set up is there is some expectation of something's going to happen because we are using the client, right? So it's just giving us access to use the client, like the JavaScript, right? So that way, if we do have an event handler, if we click a button, it's going to use that JavaScript to make a change, and then it's going to show the change immediately, right? Instead of like the with the server components, if we want to make a change, we're going to have to make a request. It's going to have to send that request to the server. The server's going to have to output something, and then it's going to have to essentially it's going to end up re-rendering the whole page. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
No worries. So that's a good question. And like I said, feel free. Feel free to if you have any question at any point, you feel free to jump in and interrupt. No worries. But yeah, that's what's happening. So like for just like in this example, we seen this when we use our use state. This is the count, this is the use state. So on a server component, you don't have access to this because it's generating the HTML and then sending it to the the browser. And then it's just sending it as static HTML. With the client, you are able to interact with this because now you state means something because we have access to that JavaScript and we're able to do it that way. All right. Any more questions? Okay, before we move on. Okay. So with that, you can do the asynchronous data fetching and the server component, right? So even though we are waiting on uh the server components to complete before it renders the page, you can make them async so that way we can do other things while we wait for that data, right? So a server yeah, so we can wait in so we don't have to use the use effect, right? And then like I said, the page render once the data is ready. Because of this, there if we don't have anything to handle, if we don't have like a loading effect or anything like that, we'll just get like a either it will either show like a blank page or the page that you're clicking from, it'll just sit there and then you'll just see like the typical, like when you click on the link and then you just see the X. And I'm sure we've all experienced it before where you click on a link and you can't tell anything is happening, but the only way you might know is because you see this X and then that, or you see like a loading bar that's being like maybe from the browser or something like that, but there's no interface to show you that it's loading. So sometimes you can see like where it's not being handled. But luckily for us, Next.js does have a method for handling that as well, as you may have already seen if you were looking at just through the material. But that is the a file. So it actually uses another file, and that is the loading.txx file. So just like the same way you do your page.txx, for the page that you want to show like a loading page wall or animation or anything like that, you would just put um a loading.txx file, and then anytime while you wait for a server component to load, it's going to render that loading.txx uh in the meantime, and then it's going to render the page. Here we have a example of passing server data to a client component. So what happens is you fetch in the server component. So any like if you're making your API calls, anything like that, any calculations, you're gonna do it on the client side or the server side. And then you're gonna pass that data down as a prop to a client component. So just so we remember from our React class, we are able to give our components props. So in this instance, just kind of like we did, similar to imagine this same thing with like we did with the use effect. We'll get more hands-on with this on Saturday, but imagine like how we did a use effect, right? We had a use effect, we ran a use effect, uh, then we would typically usually it'd be a use effect use state combo, right? We have a use effect, we fetch data, then we store that data in a use state, and then we take that use state and then we would assign it to the prop, right? It's basically the same, a similar structure, but this in this case, all you're doing is you're making a direct fetch, and then you are right? And so it can be const projects equals await, and then this is the function, or it can just be this is the function to get the that fetch, and then you storing it or you storing it as projects, and then we're just passing it directly into the prop. So that's the one way that you would pass it into a client component, right? So you can call client components inside of server components, and then you can use that interactivity of the client component to be able to interact with the user be able to interact with the client. Um So that's another way. So don't think just it's either just one client components or server components. Uh, the it's also let me see. So yeah, don't think it's just server compliance and versus like client components. You can use them interchangeably. So don't think you're just locked into if you use a client component, it has to be a client component. You can pass data from a server component to a client component. And then be able to use the data that you get from that server component to render uh things based on the user's input. That's what I'm trying to get at. So, and then like I said, we're just going over today, but once we get in class, you'll be able to get more hands-on with it. And like I said, it sounds like it's very different, but it's really the similar structure to how we use effects, right? So you can think of that same method for even like doing different things like you're gonna see that a lot, right? You do a fetch, you store it, and then you use that stored data to pass it into something else, right? Whether it's a something that the user can interact with or it's like generating that static HTML. Any questions about that? I know it seems kind of confusing. It can seem kind of confusing at first, but like I said, uh we'll get hands-on with it, try to build some more muscle memory with it. And then that's what I was talking about with the loading.txx. This is that file. So you add a loading.txx to an like in basically next to a page .txx. So next what is it? So it shows it, like I said, it shows it while it's waiting for that server component to fetch. And it's a lot more simple versus the way we had to do it in React, having to wire up that loading state and then uh do that conditional rendering. Next handles that for us. And all we had to do is simply add a loading.txx page. And then so I'll show that real quick. Give me one. Okay. Sorry about that. Um, let me see. Okay. So one thing I wanted to show is let me go ahead and pull it up. It's the portfolio. So we go through. Oh, oh yeah. I have it. Okay. So here, I already have a delay built in to simulate the loading. Let me do 3 seconds. Uh, okay. So like I mentioned, you see here when you click on it, uh, in this instance, it doesn't show like we don't even get um the indication that it is loading something because it's doing it on the server side, right? It didn't make it an actual request uh to like a new page or anything per se. So like the browser doesn't recognize it as, you know, loading up a new page per se. So it's just making that server request and then it's returning that HTML to us. So and that's that delay. What we would do here for that, I'm sorry, not trying to give y'all motion sickness, I promise. But what we do here is we'd add, make sure, we're doing the project. We're gonna add the loading.txx, and then just like a regular component, uh, we will do. Let's do it live. Uh, and then we'll do each one. Okay. Well, now, so just like a regular function, and then we return div, then the H1 just saying loading dirt project. So here we go and then so loading Derek's projects. And then once it delivers that HTML, it replaces it with the page.txx content. And it's as simple as that. A lot quicker than having to do the conditional rendering and all that fun stuff. And then let's see. One thing we can do is okay, so actually we can even let's do it like this. If we put it right here, so I put it in the top layer of the app, so right where our home page is, and then from here, let's see, let me refresh it. You see that we still get the loading screen. So even though just so you just you might get the impression that it's going to be for whatever level it's at, like the to the corresponding page, right? Which it is. In this case, like any page. So in this case, any page that loads is going to use this loading.txx, right? So anywhere in our application, uh, it's going to use that loading.txx. So really, you can get away with just using one loading.txx if you want the same loading screen across every page, right? So similar to how the layout works, right? It's going to if you go, so right here, we go into here, and if we go into one of our folders and there's no layout page or a loading page or a loading file, I should say, if there's no loading file, then it's just gonna go up to the topmost loading file from its parent, right? So from its parent structure, the hierarchy, I guess how you would say. So projects is gonna go up to, so projects are gonna go up to pages. It's not going to see a loading, and then it's going to go up to app, and then it's going to see this loading, and then it's going to use that loading. So, and it's going to be the same for every page under that. So that's something you can keep in mind, and that's similar to how the layout works, right? So you don't have to make a loading page for each, um, yeah, loading file for each page you have. You can just use that one top level one if you want to as well. But you can also Um, that's also a good way, for instance, like if we have, let's say we had, this was our pages, right? But if we wanted this to be like, let's say we had an application that was three different, let's say, let's say we had like a rental application per se, right? You got like a property management application. You got pages for the landlord and then you got pages for the tenants. You could even have this how we have the pages, you can have it as tenant and then you can have one for landlord, right? And then you can put a loading one for the tenant and then loading one for the landlord. So each set of pages will have their own loading. So that's like an example like of a way you can structure it to be able to use it dynamically in that way. So that way, anybody who's in the set of pages that are for landlords will get the landlord loading screen. Anybody who's in the set of pages for tenants will get the tenant loading screen. So you can even structure it that way. And so that's something to keep in mind as you're building your projects out as well using Next, is because yeah, as you building your project out and as you how you're deciding you want to structure it. So I know I said that the structure a lot of time is comes down to how you want like preference, right? But you also have to consider like the functional side of things, right? So like um if you're thinking about it that way, you're like, well, if I want to do loading pages for each, each different section of a page or how, this section versus this section, that's something to keep in mind as you're designing your project structure as well. Any questions about loading or anything like that? Any questions in general? No? Okay. Because that's all I have for today to go through. So if you have anything that you want to address, anything you have questions about Next in general, or if you've seen anything while you were, even if we haven't covered it yet, if there's anything that you've seen that you have a question about, or if you have a problem with what you've been working on or anything like that, this is a good time to ask. If not, I'll let you steal your time back for today. Um, no, no questions? No? Okay. Well, I guess I'll let you have the rest of your time back. Uh,
Thank you.
Thank
of
you very
course,
much.
of course. I
All
hope this
right.
was a good one for you. It was pretty quick, but I think it was a good one. But we're gonna be a lot more hands-on on Saturday. So until then, I will see you on Saturday. Thank you.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
We'll see you Saturday.
Bye.